Well, first, thank you, Adam, and thank you, Kevin, and for everybody that's been watching. I think this has probably been the biggest point of differentiation between Kevin and myself. And I would respectfully disagree with Kevin's position on this. I think in an interview with you, Adam, a couple weeks ago, he said that we need more of the same, that we need to stay the course. And I just disagree with that approach. What we've been talking about for the last several months in the entirety of the campaign is the need to have a comprehensive approach to solving the homeless crisis that we have. So when we've been discussing this, we've talked about the need to implement a comprehensive approach to this, one that looks at strengthening the ordinances that we have, banning camping in the city. And then for those that are here, for those that want help, those that need help from Manchester, we need to make sure that we are providing the communication and the coordination with our community partners who are doing some great work in this space. And of course, affordable housing. That's something that we have to move as expeditiously as humanly possible to make sure we're bringing more affordable housing into the city as quickly as possible.
Mr. Kavanaugh, the exact quote that you said in that report was, "What I would like to see is what we're doing." Is the current approach enough to solve the problem?
Thank you for having us, Adam, and thank you, Jay, too. It's been a pleasure doing these rounds here. What I want to talk about is the action that we are doing, and that's what I'm talking about. When just last week at the board meeting, we approved ARPA and home funds to create 187 new low-income units for people to get into. We've approved, I think it was $700,000 for 16 new beds for a women's shelter. So these are women on the street that'll be off the street with a roof over their head. And that's what we're doing. Those are the actions we're taking. We've also approved $300,000 for to incentivize landlords to use Section 8 vouchers. And those are the actions we'll take. And I keep on talking about that. If we're doing something that is working, we'll amplify it. If it's not working, we'll pivot and try something else, because we have to do this. This is a huge problem, and we've hired a homelessness director, an overdose director, and we're going to want to see results, and that's what we're doing. The actions we're taking will make a difference.
There is a point of difference between you two here on the camping ordinance. Mr. Rouet, you're in favor of a full ban of public camping to try to get rid of the encampments. Where do you propose that those people should go?
So I think this goes back to what I've been talking about since the beginning, about the need to break the cycle that we currently see on our streets, whether it's with addiction or mental health. We need to break the cycle that we are in, so that people, if they are in violation of that banning ordinance, that when they're at that point of most vulnerable, when they're whether it's an addiction or mental health, that we're able to make sure that we're building them into a sustainable life, so that we don't have to, continue to open either additional shelters or look for places for them to go, because we'll have broken the cycle that is causing them to stay in the condition that we're in. Again, that goes back to the comprehensive approach that I've been talking about. That does include banning camping in the city, but then we look to triage, stabilize, and transition them into a sustainable life in the long term. And this, to me, you can't arrest your way out of the problem, but this is a tool in the toolbox for downtown businesses, so that we're not impeding foot traffic. This is one of the concerns that I've consistently heard from business owners throughout the city. When there's a growing encampment, that's not safe for the city, it's not safe for the individuals that are there, and it's not good for our downtown economy either.
Alderman Kavanaugh, you said that a ban will not solve the homeless problem. Why shouldn't this be a tool in the toolbox for Manchester?
Well, we have existing ordinances that we can enforce. And, I was on a ride along this week with the Manchester Police Department. I see firsthand what they're doing, and that's why I'm so proud. They've seen what I've done for 8 years as an alderman and 6 years as a state senator, and that's why they've endorsed me. They know I'll have their backs, and they'll know I'll do to give them what they need to help not only with homelessness but crime. But we can't talk about homelessness without talking about housing, drug addiction, and mental health, and opportunity. And that's what we're doing. We can keep on looking at that, but we have to when we opened the shelter in Manchester last winter, it saved lives. We have the engagement center that's helping with these wraparound services. Our homelessness director is the point of contact to help coordinate all the nonprofits working together. And that's just like as a coach for many years, you don't do this apart, you don't do it in a silo, you do it together. And that's exactly what I'll do, is bring people together, and that's what we're doing to try to solve this. It's very complex, and if we all had the easy answer, it'd be fixed, but we have to keep on doing what we're doing. And again, if it's working, let's amplify it.
As we just discussed, one of the ways to ease the issue of homelessness is to add housing. Alderman Kavanaugh, where in the city can Manchester add housing, and what kind of housing do you want to see built?
Well, one of the first debates we talked a lot about housing, and the next night, affordable housing, and the next night I went to another house party, and there were two couples there in their 70s. They asked me, they said, "What about us? We live in the city. We want to stay in the city. Our kids are older. They're here. And with the first thing we ask, we want to sell our house because it's too big for us, is where do we go? I think we have to look at affordable housing, we have to look at workforce housing, market rate housing, and 55 plus. Right across the board. I mean, it's affecting everyone. It's affecting homeless all the way to 55 plus, and that's what we have to do. Because we want to keep people in Manchester. People are coming here because of the things we've done in the last 8 years that I've been on the board, and businesses are coming, people are coming, and we have to build. I was in the trades my whole life, in my career, and I know how to build and will build.
Mr. Rouet, same question to you. How do you plan to meet the demand, and where can this housing go?
Sure. So I think you're going to look at greater density in the areas where it makes the most sense. But Kevin, again, respectfully, you have been on the board for 8 years and in the state Senate for 6 years as well. And I think the words on this topic are good, but I think we need to see much more action. So the things that I've been talking about are providing greater regulatory consistency for developers in the city, better incentivization of those who are developing to make sure that they're able to make profits on this as well, to bring them into the community, better streamlining of our permitting processes as well. We cannot be in this same problem 5 to 10 years from now because we've not reworked the permitting processes that are taking far too long to get housing into the marketplace here in the city. And then also we need to make sure that we are moving as expeditiously as possible to reform and update our zoning ordinances so that we can actually make the changes that are needed. We can't be in this condition in another 5 to 10 years with the lack of housing that we have now. And as mayor, I would put my shoulder into this and make sure we're able to do it quickly.
Alderman Cavanaugh, 30 seconds to respond.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, 8 years that I've been on the board, we've made progress, and that's why people are coming to Manchester. 6 years in the Senate, I was part of the group that started the Housing Appeals Board to make it easier for developers to build and to be able to go to a third party when towns are saying no. That's the kind of leadership I've brought, and it's kind of action that I will bring to the mayor's office. And these relationships I've built over the past 8 to 14 years, I'll use as the mayor. I'll go see those people. I won't have to make those relationships. I'll call them, and we'll work together to make sure we all do this together.
Recently, the city decided to eliminate trash collection from certain large apartment buildings. That plan has been put on hold until after the election. Alderman Cavanaugh, you supported making this trash policy change, saying cities like Nashua have done the same thing. Do you still want to see it implemented later this year?
I think we have to look at it. I think it's one of the approaches. We talked to the DPW. There was a rat infestation. There was one kid got bit in the face by a rat. We have to do something. We went to DPW, come up with a plan. They presented it. We had 6 to 7 public meetings. But when it was implemented, I think we can do it better. I think we can talk to the businesses that are going to be affected, and that's why we have to do that. We listened to them that night when they came in, and it's exactly what I'll do as mayor. We're going to try something. If it doesn't work, let us know it's not working because we're going to try something else. We have to do this. We can't let things just sit, and that's the kind of action I will do, but I will also listen to people. And the entire board did that. We've all supported that, and we all decided too, let's look at this, and whatever the new board is, let them decide what they want to do. But I think we have to do something.
Mr. Rouet, would you have voted the same way?
I wouldn't have supported it in the first place. I think when this was passed, I had a number of property managers, I had a number of tenants, call me, text me, send me messages through social media saying that they were terrified. That the thing that we talk about in the city is creating more affordable housing, lowering rents, having a better place to do business here in the city of Manchester. And this to me struck me as the antithesis of that. So I'm glad that there was a reconsideration. But at a time like this, where you have a lot of tenants who are on the margins and they're concerned that if their rents go up, $50 a month, that they're on that line where they may then end up homeless. And that's not right. We have to be doing everything in our power to increase the amount of affordable housing we have in the city, not raising rents on people, making it easier to do business in the city of Manchester, not making it more difficult. And as mayor, I certainly wouldn't want to see this brought back up again, and I would work to defeat it if it were.
All right, we have many more issues to get to, and we're going to try to get to them after this break.